Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's your favorite paranormal investigator. My name's Tim Sudano. This is Paranormal Insight. Welcome to the show. In our continuing series regarding the truths and misconceptions and folklore in general, we started out with vampires last week a little bit. We delved into that with Michelle DeRoche. And now this week we have AP. Oh, there it is. AP Sylvia. So sorry, AP. Let me tell you a little bit about AP. He has had a long interest in the supernatural in general, supernatural beliefs with particular focus on vampire folklore. Perfect for us. In his book, Vampires of Lore, Traits and Modern Misconceptions, he explores how our modern notions about vampires compare to the folkloric belief of the past. His writing has appeared in the Journal of Vampire Studies, which is pretty cool, and Voices of the Vaults. He has been a guest on local and national syndicated radio programs, as well as a variety of podcasts, and very happy to have him grace ours today. He also runs the website locationsoflore.com, where it talks about his visits to unique places, including alleged vampire graves, which I will be more to... In fact, let's bring him on. Without further ado, Mr. AP Sylvia. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Tim. Thank you for having me.
Hope it didn't... I don't know how I blanked on the last name like Sylvia. My apologies for that.
No worries.
So let's dive into... we're going to jump, not off topic, but just hit a niche, because I did a special maybe a year ago on vampire folklore and the real scare it had in the past. It was in Poland, I believe, that they dug up a grave of either it was a girl or it was a very young woman who was a suspected vampire, and her coffin was basically booby trapped. It had a scythe implanted, so if she sat up, she'd cut her own head off. And her hands were bound, and I think her feet were cut off, if I remember correctly. So let's dig into more immediately, the hysteria and or belief system of our ancestors when it came to vampirism.
Yeah, sure. Well, there's, there were kind of beliefs about vampires or, vampire-like beings, revenants, whatever you want to call them. The names obviously differ in many
Mm-hmm.
different countries throughout the world in different time periods. So sometimes there is evidence like that that you describe where you do find a burial. They're sometimes referred to as deviant burials, where the burial practice, there was a deviation from the norm. Right.
Gotcha.
So, not normally people wouldn't be buried that way, but then you find one particular grave where suddenly something was different. So there's a deviation there.
Yeah.
And those do come up from time to time in different countries, where you'll see, the body was, mutilated in some way, or, there's some kind of, they're bound, or there's a stone shoved in the mouth, that kind of thing. That's, there was actually a case in New England of a burial that was found, that had actions had been taken against the body. But so there's been different areas, different beliefs. Essentially it all revolves around a fear of the dead, of a dead person coming back to life in some fashion or other. Some sort of kind of continued vitality that the corpse would have, and they would somehow be causing injury or illness or calamity to the community. So it could be family members or members of the town are getting sick and passing away, or there's just a kind of a sickness going around, or even sometimes more broader than that, there might be some kind of weather issue or crops or something. But oftentimes, yeah, there was some sort of unexplained malady that's going through a town, and people are sort of trying to make sense of what's going on. Why is this happening? And they sort of trace the steps back and go, well, this all started when this first person died. What's going on there? And so attention kind of turns towards that burial, and they investigate it, and they see what they can find.
It's fascinating that you point that out, because that is rather recently was practiced in, I want to say, like Slovakia or something like that, where I think it was in 2008 or something like that. There was a man who broke into a grave because he had a strong suspicion that the guy in there was a vampire, because children throughout his little village kept dreaming about them coming to him, coming to them in the night. So he desecrated the grave, and he stabbed him through the heart, and he chopped off his head in the coffin.
Yeah.
And he was briefly arrested and then immediately released and touted as a hero.
Yeah, there are some communities. I think I'm familiar with a case in the early 2000s. I think it was Romania, where there was a village where they thought someone was was a vampire, and they took action against the body. And I think in that case, I think it was his daughter found out about it. She didn't live in the village anymore. She had moved like to the city, and she found out about it and was not happy. And I think the authorities were called and whatnot. But so it does seem like there is evidence that it does persist in some spots in the world even today, which shows you kind of how powerful some of those beliefs are.
Indeed. Let's go to let's go back to let's go to your book. I'm going to show everyone a picture of your book. So you wrote this book because you're I guess not only a student of, but perhaps a fan of the vampire lore in general. Or am I correct in that assumption?
Well, I've always been interested in the supernatural, the unknown, paranormal, all that. Love a good kind of spooky show or documentary, that kind of thing. Even when I was a little kid, I had like a book that talked about ghosts, and I thought it was the neatest thing.
Yeah.
So I've always kind of been curious about that stuff, and just kind of what people believe in the world, even like Greek mythology and things like that.
Sure.
But I got on this topic specifically. A number of years ago, I was at a Ripley's Believe It or Not museum. Have you ever been to one of those?
Sure. Yeah, there's one in San Francisco. Yeah.
Yeah, they're great. They're great. So I was at the one at Times Square in New York.
Okay.
And they had a number of them have these vampire killing kit. So there's one probably at yours as well, I would guess.
There is. Yeah.
So that was a lot of fun. So I saw that, and I was like, oh, that's cool.
At least there used to be. I don't know if it's still there.
Yeah, a lot of the locations had one. And I thought that was neat. And so afterwards, I started kind of like, I took to the internet. I'm like, well, what's the story with these kits? Because it said in the card that, people would buy them when they'd go to Eastern Europe, to keep safe from vampires and whatnot.
Right.
And then I found out that there was some controversy around these kits, where some people were asserting like, well, these actually aren't period pieces. They're more modern, and people took antique parts and assembled them together to make these kits. And one of the arguments for that was like, well, these don't really reflect actual folklore. They reflect like movie movie stuff, like movie vampires.
Right.
And so I was like, well, what do you mean by movie vampires? What's the what's the difference there? And I had known that there was some differences between like what you see in movies for what constitutes a vampire and like what people really believed about vampires in the past.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, what's the story here? What are the differences? And I couldn't really find like a good discrete like explanation or listing. And I kind of wanted a breakdown. I'm like, well, what are the things in movies that are actually accurate and what aren't? And so I started sort of researching it myself, and I ended up writing the book where I did this analysis, and I kind of went trait by trait of all the things you think about vampires. And I asked the question, well, like, is this just like a modern kind of misconception as per the title, or is it actually something that happened in the past, or was believed to happen in the past, I should say. And that's how I wound up with the book.
Excellent. Michelle and I discussed on the last show last week. We had a similar debate without either of us really knowing the full answer. Something somewhere had to have happened where they caught a human feeding on another human. Was it cannibalism? Maybe. I mean, I'm talking super ancient past. Like, we just left the cave, we just started civilization, maybe. Who knows? But somewhere, somehow, they saw this happening. Or perhaps it was an older warrior, like a rite of passage to eat a part of your enemy, your fallen enemy, and gain their abilities or power or something along those lines. Because that was practiced in a few different early tribes of humanity. And so that could be the basis. I'm not saying it is, but where do you find the starting point of the vampire tale really coming to life? Because it's been around since the Sumerian days as far as writings go.
Sure. So, there's a lot to unpack with this stuff. And one of the first things I think you need to address is like, well, what constitutes a vampire? Right? Well, what do we mean when we say a vampire? Because when you look, if you look at articles or some books or whatever, and they're like, oh, here's a big listing of all these vampires from all these different places and all these times. Oftentimes some of those things, they'll be like monsters or demons, and oh, it's a demon that drinks blood. We'll put it in the vampire list or something like that. But it's not to me. So, but they're not like an undead person, someone who is a living person, a regular person, and then dies and then comes back to life, right? It's something else.
Right.
But there's a lot of like lumping in that can happen. So one of the first things you kind of need to do when you're going after, it's kind of like, well, let's learn about vampires. Well, what constitutes a vampire, at least for you in your research and your analysis? What do you want in and what do you want out for these stories?
Right.
So that's kind of one of the things you kind of need to tackle first. And that's one of the things I talk about in my book, where I said, well, there's to me, a vampire, it's got to be, a person who was once living, who is now deceased, and they're causing torment to the living population in some fashion. And action has to be done to the corpse itself to get rid of this monster, to dispel it, right? So there's a physicality to vampires that I kind of look for. And so, these kinds of creatures pop up in different places, different times, going back, many years. Where it started is an interesting question. I think there's a few different, explanations for that. One, I think generally speaking, people have a fear of death. And so who's closer to death but the dead, right? So someone who has died, right, but still kind of longs for the living, they might be a threat to you. They might bring you towards death, right? They themselves being dead. You see that. Another thing that you see in a lot of accounts, especially the ones that kind of get into specifics more detailed, is people would exhume bodies and they would look for essentially vampiric signs, evidence that the body was in fact a vampire. And the thing of it is that what they were seeing when they were looking at these bodies are actually misinterpretations of the actual decomposition process.
Right.
So when you get into like, blood drinking, well, where did that come from? Well, actually, they would look at a corpse and you can, through natural process, actually see sometimes blood around the mouth of a dead person. Wasn't there before when you buried them.
Yeah, it'll actually exhume itself through the nose, the ears, and the mouth. Yeah,
you can see. Yeah, you can see fluid coming out, and so people would exhume a body. Like, something's not right. It happened when this person first died. Let's take a look at this person. Then they would exhume them, and suddenly they would see someone in the coffin who's got maybe what appears to be blood around their mouth or face, and suddenly they're like, oh well, that must mean that they were drinking the blood. They were sucking the blood of the living people, and that's why they're sick, right? And that's why they're ill. And they would see other things too, like they would see someone who it might appear that the corpse had gained weight since they had been buried. They might bloat it. Yes, exactly. So it's interesting because they would look at this person and they might actually see someone who looks in a way healthier than they did when they got buried, right? So they
Yeah.
would look at that as that. So they would see that as evidence of, oh, this person, this dead person is stealing the life, the vitality of the community, right? And so
Gotcha.
there's that could be, so some of the origins could just be those kinds of misinterpretations. And obviously when you get into blood, there's associations with blood being sort of equivalent or representative life force, life energy going back to ancient times. So
Sure.
that kind of works its way in naturally.
Gotcha. Really quick hello to Sherry. Welcome to the chat. Good to have you here. I don't know if you can see Sherry in the chat room, or not, AP, but she's there. She hasn't said anything
Hello.
yet except hello.
Oh yeah, I see.
But and thank you to our viewers all over the place, actually. So thanks for showing up, and then our international listeners as well. Thank you for joining us. We are talking about vampires and vampire lore. We just got through discussing how, in trying to suss out the problems people were having in a given village, mass illness or weird dreams or something about that, they would exhume suspected vampires and observe what is now known, modern science, as decomposition. But they'd say, oh, there's blood around the mouth. Well, that's just fluid leaving the body, and then, bloating and stuff. Because we had a few latecomers coming in, so I'm just catching everyone up real quick. You are now caught up. So let me ask you this then. When it comes to the modern, I guess, let's start with Bram Stoker on, as far as human vampire lore, we have, and I'm going to show everyone a picture here. We have, this was created by AI. She's a snaggletooth vampire. She only has the one fang. But we have creatures that look like this. They walk the night, relatively pale. They have canines that protrude a little abnormally, and then the classic feeding of the the vampire feeding on a victim in some Elizabethan or Victorian era scene or setting. Typically, again, more cinematically, perhaps more literarily. I cannot talk today. When we take the modern vampire and then we do a side-by-side comparison with the ancient interpretation of the vampire, they, from my research, they vary rather radically. What did you find?
That's exactly right. They're quite dissimilar in a lot of ways. Our We have a lot of our vampire, our fictional vampire that we see in movies like that, is sort of a descendant or inherited a lot from like 19th century, like Victorian Gothic fiction,
Gotcha.
right? And in the 1800s, there was this pivot where vampires started becoming attractive and suave and sophisticated and moved in high society, and all of these kinds of things. So you get these kind of romantic notions of the vampire, when in reality, in the past, there was nothing romantic or anything about a vampire.
Yeah,
For
pretty scary.
yeah, they were very, people lived in fear of these things. You think about a village coming together to dig somebody up. There's nothing, there's nothing romantic with that.
No.
It was terrifying to people. So vampires existing in society and moving around, you don't see that much in the folklore. They're very much, they're in their grave, they come out at night, or sometimes during the day, but most of the time at night, terrorizing people. And that's it. You didn't often bump into one at a party, by and large, in the stories.
Gotcha. The one of the more ancient versions, actually two of them that pop into my head, are the Lamia out of ancient Greece, and I forget its name now, but they had a very specific name for it. It was a South Pacific origin, like Laos or something like that, where the vampire was more of a shadow, and if its shadow intersected yours, it drained your blood. And then there was the Lamia, which was a cursed woman, typically. So, I mean, and these are frightening looking creatures too.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
These are-
You and in there in those kinds of stories, you start to see some of the overlap with vampire folklore and folklore around witches,
yeah,
right? Because like for some of those, like in Southeast Asia, there's something like called a panangalan or something like that, where it's a
yeah.
woman whose head would like detach from her body and float around and stuff like that.
Most
But
of
she
the
was
societies.
yeah,
Yeah,
but she wasn't a dead person, right?
no.
But she was sucking the life, sucking the blood, or whatever. So it gets involved. So that monster gets involved in the conversation. But you could also say, well, that's kind of more like a witch, right?
Yeah.
Because there's like a person doing magic, right? And so you
Mhm.
actually see a lot of overlap between vampire folklore and witch folklore in a variety of ways. Because we like to put boxes around things a lot.
Pigeonhole, sure.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
like, well, that's a vampire movie. Oh, that's a witch movie. Oh, and those are werewolves over there.
Right, right.
But when you actually look at folklore, they were all influencing each other, all of these beliefs, and they're all sort of they kind of relate to each other in different ways. So the lines get a lot blurrier, which I find quite interesting.
Me too. There. Speaking of that creature, in the Balinese tradition, it's known as a layak.
Mm.
Same exact thing. The upper body detaches, flies around, and that one, if well, actually, I think the pangolin, and or not the pangolin. That's a little creature. I'm sorry, whatever it was you just said, and the
Yeah, the
layak are.
Penangalan or something like
There you
that.
go. There you
Yeah,
go. They fly around mysteriously. They carry their organs with
yeah,
them. They have a
they do.
super long tongue, and with regard to the layak, at least, that goes after fetuses
Mm.
in late term. And most anthropologists and such believe that it was a way to explain miscarriages.
Yeah, you get a lot of those kind of ancient monsters like the Lamia or like Lilith.
Oh, sure.
They would go after children, young children.
Yeah.
And I think that makes sense that would be a cultural fear, right?
Yeah,
Of
yeah. That is, yeah.
especially in times gone by when childhood mortality was a lot higher.
Hmm.
They'd want to protect their kids, and so they would, these creatures could be used to sort of explain some of that.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, that's a whopper of an explanation. Oh,
Oh yeah, I know.
this
I know.
crazy woman detaches half her body,
Yeah, yeah.
flies
I mean,
around, and
the imagery is striking. It's very striking. Very
uh,
creepy.
for sure. Big welcome to Heidi Gall. She's back on the air with us in the chat. Hello, Heidi. Heidi's a friend of the show. She's always supporting us and a lot of the other UPRN hosts. So welcome to
Hello.
Heidi. And Sherry's still here. That's good to know. If either of you have any questions for AP, please put them in the chat. Moving on to the next part. While yes, vampires have various forms they take, and the overlap, like you said, with witches and other things, is probably more realistic as far as interpreting what a vampire is, because you, like you said, you can pick and choose, and there is
Mm.
overlap with a lot of these monsters that we have in our history and folklore. And so, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Would you then say we have misinterpreted what a vampire actually is? I mean, is there? How do I put this? Well, I'll borrow from one of the things you provided. What constitutes a vampire? You kind of touched on this, but
Yeah,
maybe you can get a
yeah.
little more specific.
I think for me and kind of the way I go at it, I think when it comes to vampires, a lot it's a fear of the dead and what they can do to you. So to me, that's the start. That's the starting point. Is that a vampire or a revenant or whatever you want to call them? There's many names for the phenomena, around the world. But it's the kind of revived corpse of a once living person. So it used to be a real person, a community member, someone people knew, right? It's not some like, you know, uh, otherworldly creature or from another dimension, like a demon or a monster or something like that. Like it used to be a real person.
Hmm.
That person died, and now they have come back to life, maliciously so, right? So
Right.
they're causing harm to the living. They pose a threat to the living, in some fashion. I think nowadays we blood drinking is kind of like this sort of a key essential piece to vampires. If you look at folklore, it wasn't necessarily that big of a like that necessary. It could be something else. Like there's stories about, oh well, this dead person came into the room at night and was strangling someone, right?
Right.
Strangling the life out of them, something like that. There's undead that they would actually wouldn't leave their graves. They would just like they would chew. They would like chew on their shroud. They would chew on their flesh. And that would cause illness in like family members,
Oh,
which is
interesting.
why in some of those like deviant burials you'd see like a stone shoved into the mouth so the
Gotcha.
dead person couldn't chew. And usually actually only after they've like done chewing everything would they actually leave the ground. That would happen in
Hmm.
some as well. So it's causing harm in some fashion to living. And and as I said earlier, to eliminate the vampire, you had to go to the corpse. You had to do something to the corpse. It's not like a ghost where you could kind of like, do some kind of ritual in the place and sort of send the ghost away or something like that.
Right.
With vampires, it's tactile, it's physical. You like, no, we're gonna dig up this person and we're gonna deal with this. And
Gotcha.
do something. So and they would what would be done to the corpse would differ somewhat from place to place, but there's certain kind of underlying themes uh, throughout. So to me, like those are the ones that I say, like, okay, well, this for me in my analysis is the vampire, and it's encapsulating this fear of the dead, this misunderstanding of what happens when you die, and what happens with disease and how it can spread.
Okay. Um, so when you're writing your book, what sources were you actually going places? I mean, did you visit these different areas where
I
vampirism
mean,
or some?
if I've visited some different locations, you can go on my website, locationsoflore.com, and you can actually read some posts I've done about some of the different supposed vampire graves, or people who are accused to be vampires in death, that I visited. You can learn a bit about those. Which is it makes it very real when you go to the place and you're like, oh, this is where it actually happened. Oh, they actually dug this
Yeah.
person up, and they did a big fire over here. So that's always quite striking. But I looked at a lot of sources. I tried to go back in time with sources as far as I could. You know, these days with the internet, I think it's only getting worse. Where there's a lot of articles and posts and things float around, and assertions are made, and there's no kind of citation, no sort of like, well, this is where I got this from.
Right.
It kind of just flow. It kind of just is sort of put out there. So you need to be very discerning with this stuff. I found at times like I would read, as I was trying to like say prove out a certain trait, like, oh, was this trait actually in folklore? I might read something, a modern post or a more modern article, and it was like, oh yeah, the vampires had this, and there was this situation, this story, and the vampire had this. I was like, oh, there it is. Then I would actually look up. I would look up that account in an older source, and suddenly some of the details are now gone.
Mm,
And I think part of it is we have such a strong expectation of what a vampire is that we sometimes superimpose
yeah.
that image onto older sources that didn't actually say that. When you actually read it, it doesn't say that. You just sort of like added that in, maybe on purpose, maybe not, because it's what you were expecting. So I tried to go back in time as far as I could, looking at sources from the 1700s, some far earlier.
Mm,
And if it was more modern, I tried to go for things that were scholarly in nature, well documented, well cited and stuff like that. And that gave me a much better picture than some of the more modern things that are a lot fluffier that are floating around, and say,
yeah.
oh well, people did, vampires had this, and it's like, well, great, where'd you get that from? And they
Right.
don't say, and it's like, So you need to. I had to be mindful in order to actually like answer my questions.
Gotcha. Regarding the more modern vampire, especially if you're talking about Bram Stoker and his
Sure.
inspirations and what he inspired, rather.
Oh, yeah.
God, I can't talk today. Do we have the vampire ever changing into another animal before Bram Stoker? A bat or a wolf?
So, yes and no. Vampires in folklore, vampires were believed to turn into a bunch of different kinds of animals, dogs, like I don't know, I think like some insects, or I think one story talks about like a hen, that a vampire turned into like a hen or something. So there's a lot of different animals that they could conceivably turn into, but we're for the longest time, people generally thought that vampires turning into bats was something Bram Stoker invented. Because there was like no folklore about them ever turning to bats for whatever reason. You'd think that you think
Makes
like,
sense.
oh yeah, why not? They turn into bats. It's like, nope, like it just never came up in the folklore for some reason. Like dogs and stuff, sure, but no bats. So people thought that was, oh, Bram Stoker invented that. In my research, I ran across an article that did find, I think it was like 2 references to vampires turning into bats pre-Stoker in folklore. So it turns out that Stoker can't lay claim to actually inventing vampires turning into bats, but you can certainly say that he popularized the notion of vampires becoming bats, and now it's like a given, right? In our you see the vampire, he's got like a cape with bat type wings and stuff like that. But that's it's interesting.
Yeah, it is. It's funny. There's actually been, in like I'd say the last 30 to 40 years, when it comes to the cinematic and even the literary vampire, they've moved away from that. No, we don't turn into bats. No, we don't turn into dogs. God, that's ridiculous. Where'd they come up with that? But it's amazing. It's like that they've actually steered away from some of the mainstays of the old, Bela Lugosi vampire.
They absolutely have, and I think part of that is the vampire kind of adapts and evolves over time. So I kind of mentioned how vampires became romantic and this and that.
Right.
I think nowadays with a lot of vampire shows, there's people are turning away from the more sort of supernatural or magical elements of vampires to get into something that's more scientifically believable, right? So you see shows where vampirism, it's like a virus that they get, and it makes them immortal, and it gives them super strength, and they gotta drink blood. But like, well, they can't like fly or turn into bats or do magic, or like, and crosses don't bother them and stuff like that, right? So there's like this scientific vampire that sort of emerged in modern kind of fiction and movies and stuff like that. So you see the vampires morphing yet again to kind of meet the expectations of the public,
of the modern public. Yeah.
Yes.
There's only one exception. What We Do in the Night. Have you ever saw that show?
Oh yeah, it was What We Do in the Shadows.
What We Do in the Shadows. I'm sorry. Yes.
Oh yeah, great show. Great. It was originally, I think, a movie, which was great, and then they did the TV show, which was hilarious. I really enjoy that show. Just ended. I think the last season was the last.
Yeah, it did.
One,
that's too bad. It was a good show.
It was really good show. I got such a kick out of that.
Yeah, and they kept the bat thing. They kept.
Yeah. They very much went with like the old school, like Eastern European expectations and stuff like that. It was very very amusing show.
It was a lot of fun. Yeah, they kept some of the old tropes.
They did.
So we have a creature who used to be human, returns for whatever reasons, and you mentioned Revenant before. I've been studying Revenants pretty exclusively for I'm a filmmaker, and I just wrote I did write it, but we just released a film not too long ago called Blaney Tucker's Ghost, and one of the bad guy in there is a revenant, and that's a spirit that is returned strictly for the purpose of revenge. And so that's what drives them. But they have a lot of ghost-like abilities as well as being corporeal. So they could be either. So they're interesting creatures, very much, and they do have a lot of aspects of the vampire, as you were mentioning before. So when we have a creature that may return with a revenant kind of initial thing, because you said there's stories of people just choking the life out of someone.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also the aspect of the again, I think it's a Bram Stokerism, where they turned into a mist,
Mm-hmm.
an ethereal fog. Tell me about the fog. Is that Stoker's creation, or was there something to that before?
So it's interesting because different different cultures, different places had some different views about how corporeal a vampire needed to be.
Right.
Especially when it comes to getting out of the grave, right? Like how they because usually they're buried underground, right?
Right.
Like in the movies, there's some mausoleum with a coffin that's open, that's like a room, but normally these people are all buried.
Right.
Um, so there were some beliefs where the vampire would sort of rematerialize above the ground and could have a mist-like quality to themselves. Or some of them, like the vampire was existing for a while before it got its full body back, and it was more just kind of like light or sparks or something that
Okay.
people see. So depending on the place, vampires might have a non-corporeal aspect to them.
Okay.
Um, you know, and then other times, or there were some beliefs where to find the vampire grave, you'd look around and you'd look for a grave that had a hole in it that was maybe this big. And that's
Oh,
where the vampire gets out. It's well, how does a
gotcha.
full grown person get through a 3-inch hole, right?
Right.
But that was what they. So again, there's this more there's something not quite corporeal about them at times. But then others, it's very much nope, it's a person and it's clamoring out, and that's that.
Gotcha.
So there are cases where it wasn't necessarily always fully the body.
Okay. Okay. Good stuff. Um, I'm just gonna do. Sorry. Um, I have to admit, I have not read your book. I'm sorry to
That's
say.
okay.
But do you have? Because I have a couple of stories to go along with this. But do you have an actual vampire account now? And was this something you witnessed or you heard about?
I have not witnessed any vampire accounts. I haven't seen any for myself.
Because
I've
that's book
certainly,
two.
I know, right? Haven't seen it firsthand. I've certainly read up on various accounts that have been documented. There's a number I talk about a number of them in my book. Some of them are quite specific. There's names and places and dates. And we know it happened in the sense that people believed something was happening,
Okay.
right? And thus took action accordingly.
Hmm.
And so sometimes they were written about by uh, by people observing the situation, newspaper articles, that sort of thing. I mean, there was a famous one in it was in New England in 1892, which is which is a long time ago, but not a crazy long time ago.
A little
Um,
over 100 years ago.
yeah.
Yeah.
So and that was in Exeter, Rhode Island.
Okay.
And the account was concerning a woman named Mercy Brown. It's a very well known New England vampire account. There's a number of New England vampire incidents that happened over the
Interesting.
course of a couple hundred years. But in that case, she had passed away from tuberculosis, which was then known as consumption.
Yeah.
Her mother and elder sister had passed away a couple years prior, and her brother Edwin was was dying of the same disease. He had spent some time in Colorado, which was kind of a thing that people would do when you had consumption, is you'd go for the dry air. Didn't really work for him. He came back to Exeter, essentially to pass away. He was,
Gotcha.
it was kind of the end of his life. And Mercy had died shortly before. So as sort of a last ditch effort to save him, some people in town apparently had the notion that, well, it actually could be one of the dead family members causing him to be ill.
Hmm.
And so they were basically, because the doctors at the time couldn't, there was no cure for tuberculosis, so they couldn't really help him. It was just kind of like, well, this is it. So some people in town kind of had the notion, we need to look at the dead people and see if they're to blame for his illness, and maybe we can save him. So the bodies of Mercy and her sister and her mother were all exhumed. Um, the mother and the older daughter, they had been dead for quite some time, so they looked decomposed, like
Mhm.
what one would expect. And so they were kind of they were ruled out in terms of suspicion. But Mercy, she had only been dead a couple months, I think it was, and she had died in the winter, so she was well preserved. So when they looked at, and I don't think she had, I think, in some accounts it says that she was like in a vault and she hadn't actually been put underground yet. So
Mm.
she looked like she was sleeping.
Ah.
And so the I and so and I think her Mercy's father was, I think, not really on board with this to begin with, but I think, but ultimately sort of relented and said, okay, well, let's see what we can do to save our son. So
Gotcha.
they do this analysis. They look at Mercy. They think, oh, this could be it. They take out her heart and her liver, and they, according to the people who were, they felt like it. They, in their opinion, the blood in the organs was fresh. The doctor who was there, who really wasn't, he wasn't really along with any of this, as far as I know. He was saying, no, this is to be expected, but the people were like, nope, this is it. So they found the blood in the heart and the liver. And so to them now, this is again, we're talking about sort of this misunderstanding about decomposition.
Right.
To them, they've seen the vampiric signs, right?
Okay.
Mercy's somehow preserving some aspect of vitality. Her brother is slowly dying. Um, okay, we've got this figured out. So they wound up taking the heart and in some accounts, I think, the liver, and they burn them on a rock in the cemetery. They take the ashes, they mix the ashes with water, and then they give it to Edwin to drink as a cure against his illness.
Here, Ed,
Um,
have some ashes.
yeah.
Okay.
And unfortunately, it does not cure him. He still passes away from
Well, yeah.
consumption.
Wow.
And the thing is, a major newspaper at the time kind of caught wind of what happened with this account, and so they published a number of articles about it because they were obviously, very intrigued with what happened, and kind of, to them, it was sensational news. So that's one of the reasons why we know about that particular account, and we know a lot about it because of what happened. But
Gotcha.
and the thing about sort of the ashes and consuming them, I found accounts from Romania that said the same thing.
Hmm.
So it wasn't they didn't originate that idea in New England. It was something that was pre-existing, that had come from Europe.
That does sound like something that would get passed down.
Yes.
It's like ashes will fix it. All right.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
okay, that kind of brings up an interesting question. I'm wondering where, if you have an answer or at least a theory as to why this is the case. That is, there's illness somehow in either the immediate family of someone who's passed or in the village or something like that. And they immediately suspect a dead person way over there in the graveyard is somehow passing this disease on. How?
How indeed. So, yeah, I think we have to sort of put ourselves in the minds of the people from the past,
Okay.
right? Um, you know, there was, especially the further back you go, right? Like we benefit from a lot of scientific advancement and knowledge, right? And
That's true.
even just sort of like general, like the general populace in terms of education, right? We learn about a lot of things. The further back in time you go, and depending on the place, people didn't have that benefit, right?
Right.
So like we now understand how diseases, like germ theory, right? Like if
Yeah.
someone's sick and they're coughing around you, and then you breathe it in, like, oh, you might get that illness as well or something like
Right.
that, right?
Right.
Okay, like that's a given for us. That was not a given in the past, that's how disease was spread, right?
Okay.
You look back in time and they're all, oh, it was an imbalance of the humors, right?
Fair point. Okay.
you know
Yeah.
things of that nature. Germ theory came about what, the mid 1850s, something like that.
Give or take. Yeah.
I mean, there was what was it, the first, there was a doctor who did this. It was in the 1800s. He did this study and came out saying, oh well, surgeons should wash their hands before doing procedures, and the rest of the medical community thought he was crazy. Like, wash our hands, what are you talking about? That's crazy, right? Yeah, something that's obvious to us, right?
Right. Right.
So people, in a certain sense, people with vampires were trying to make sense of their world, right? There's an illness going around, people are getting sick, what's causing this, right? There's beliefs in the past about miasma, bad air. Oh, we're breathing in
right.
some kind of poisonous air, and that's causing illness. So to them it was like, well, that dead body, there's a dead body over there, that dead person, they died, and oftentimes it was like unexpectedly, right? That was usually a good kind of key off of, like, that person died awfully young, right? That person died from an accident. It wasn't their time, right? Oh, maybe something's not right here, right? It was maybe an upset to the norm. So that first person, oh, they got sick and died, and that was kind of before the time. And now all these other people are getting sick and dying. Maybe it's that person who's bringing them with him. He's trying to preserve himself.
Gotcha.
So, I think there was that kind of aspect. So they were just trying to, they were kind of trying to use logic, right? Like, oh, people are getting sick. Oh, let's look at the people who already died. Maybe one of them is causing the problem.
Wow.
And that was,
Okay.
it was them trying to make sense of their world, and there's some catharsis there. It gives you a sense of control too, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh,
Yeah.
like, oh, we know what the problem is now. We've done something and we can solve it, right? Gives you that feeling of control.
I get you.
Yeah. And I mean, I will say, and if you think about the Mercy Brown case that I just talked about, like, you can imagine the desperation that people were experiencing to go through with that kind of process.
Yeah,
right?
No kidding.
Like, imagine like the fear and the desperation and the panic that people might have had during some of these events to warrant digging up someone you care about and doing something and sort of mutilating their body. Like, that's heavy stuff. So it wasn't, this wasn't done, kind of on a whim or something like that. This was dire situations.
Yeah. I could see that, I guess. I can what's the word? Empathize with their situation.
Yeah, I mean, again, we're from a different time, so it's hard for us to quite, to quite grasp it. But I mean, you see it even today, where, like, if you're desperate and you're looking for a cure for something, I mean, if you've got a cold and there's not, I mean, this is a silly example, but you got a cold, right? And like, well, oh, this new supplement, well, maybe that'll do it. I don't know. It's a very sort of minute sort of comparison, but it's, like, you're looking for answers, and well, maybe, maybe. And certainly when like the Mercy Brown case, where the brother Edwin was dying, as in terms, when you think of the father, well, do you want to feel like you left something on the table, like you didn't try something? There was one more thing you could have tried to save your son, but you didn't. Do you want to live with that?
Fair point. That's a very fair point right there. Yeah, you gotta cover all your bases, I guess.
It is heavy. And I've been to the Mercy Brown grave. I've been to that, and so if people want to go on my website, they can see pictures from it.
And I got your website scrolling across the bottom for those of you who want to follow up.
See it. There it is. And go there and enjoy. So many pictures.
Good stuff. There's something to be said for why vampire lore sticks. And we discussed this with Michelle in the last show, and you may have this character in your book as well, a Saint Germain, a someone Saint Germain,
Yeah, yeah. So
who
yeah,
has, sorry,
yeah. The Count of Saint Germain. Yeah,
yeah, uh, who has cropped up, interestingly, throughout history, like over hundreds of
yeah.
years. And even today, there's still stories being told. We had someone on Instagram recently retell a story about how a couple of years ago during Mardi Gras, a couple of friends, a couple of young ladies were doing the town, the beer walk or whatever during Mardi Gras, and they they get harassed by some guys or something like that, and this man steps in and says, kind of defends their honor and so forth, and he kind of tags along with them the rest of the way, and it's not until later on that one of the girls puts it together. It's like, oh my gosh, he asked to be invited in to every single place we went. He'd wait outside and, come on, you coming in? Sure. And now he joined them, and he was an older, not older, but middle-aged, dapper gentleman, kind of lending to the whole Bram Stoker thing that these people live in the elite circles.
Yeah.
But it came time to, we're talking early morning. One of the friends is not doing too well at the end of the night, pays a visit to the bushes, kind of a thing. And the gentleman says, well, listen, my place is right around the corner. Instead of you going clear across the quarter to your hotel, please stay with me. And one of the friends was just sober enough to say, that's okay. We're just no, we're fine. We're going to get a cab and we're going to go over there. Are you sure? Oh, yeah, we're sure. Thanks anyway. Thanks for escorting us through the night and so on. And she turns around to attend to her friend who's still paying the bushes a visit. And when she turns back around, this guy is gone. And I mean, I don't know, he's nowhere to be found. Not down the street, not down the alleys. He's gone. So they thought, oh my God, that could have been this guy.
That's great.
That was one story that came out. And there was another one where from this is the ancient past. I only know the story about halfway through, but there was a monastery in the quarter where some really suspicious activity took place. The nuns and the monks in that area, in that thing, would receive packages late at night, and they looked to be coffin sized. Crates, and they would see some of the crates would have dirt. Oh no, one of the crates fell and had dirt in it, nothing but dirt. So it was interesting. I was like, oh my gosh, were they housing a vampire? What's going on? So, that's a half story. I only have a little bit of it.
Yeah. So I believe what you're referring to is the Ursuline convent in
Thank you.
In New Orleans. I've been there. I've been inside it.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. So I have an article about it on my website if people want to check it out. And
if you want the whole story,
you can hear
locationsoflore.com.
Yeah, there's variations of the casket girls as they were known.
Right.
Who supposedly were, the legend goes that they were vampires that were living in the top floor of the Ursuline convent. And it's funny you bring up Saint Germain. I have the website and I look at the stats on like what pages are most popular and getting the most hits and all that. I'm like, oh, and it's so funny that I have an article about New Orleans, Jacques Saint Germain. It's a vampire story, and people think he was, the Count Saint Germain, and it is like by far like the most popular page on my website. People, it's like it gets so many more hits than like the next most popular page. So like there's a lot of interest in him, apparently. But there's supposedly the house where he supposedly lived is in New Orleans, and it's on some tours, and I saw it. It's a private residence. You can't go in, and you obviously want to be respectful of it. But you can. I took some pictures of it, so it's on. You can see it on my website, and but it's quite quite the story. I mean, and the thing is, the Count of Saint Germain actually was like a real guy back in like the 1700s or something like that, and he was actually by all accounts like a really interesting guy. Like I don't know, he knew a bunch of languages and played music, and he was, I think he worked he was like a spy for a while, and he was a really neat, and he claimed to be like an alchemist and stuff like that, which is where you get like Philosopher's Stone
Sure.
stories around him. So that's like, so he like figured out how to be immortal. So it's pretty, it was cool. It was interesting stories, interesting fellow in real life, and certainly a lot of interesting legends have kind of propped up around him.
For sure. Yeah, he's a fascinating character. Please do check it out. Go to locationsoflore.com. Check out all those stories because you will love it. For the next 15 seconds, we're going to take a quick, I'm sorry, 80 seconds. We're going to take a quick station ID and commercial break. We'll be back right after this. This is the United Public Radio Network, 107.7 FM in New Orleans and 105.3 in the Gulf Coast. UPRN talkradio.com. Esoteric programming at its finest.
Our symbol, the trident, gifted to us by the priests of Troy Xenos centuries ago when one of the first monster hunting teams out of Corinth battled a contingent of Vrykolakas that had infested their temple. After the victory over the monsters, the head priest declared, "You are three lances acting as one, not unlike Poseidon's mighty trident of light. That would become our name, the Trident of Light, for the good we did and still do against the dark evils of this world."
Available at Amazon Books. Follow us on Instagram at paranormal.insight. Stay informed on upcoming shows, ask questions, and see what chilling paranormal stories we're following. Don't forget to follow us on YouTube at paranormal_insight. Click the live tab to see our latest videos. And we're back. So we're talking with AP Sylvia about vampires, vampire lore, what sticks and what doesn't, and how the vampire has been, well, I guess the ultimate creature that can adapt, or has been adapted, I guess, transformed by us in our lore and history and stories and all that fun stuff. So we were talking about Count Saint Germain out of New Orleans. Now, where's he from originally? Because he wasn't born there.
Saint Germain, he was well, the actual historical figure, I think people don't know where exactly he was born. He was a mysterious dude, but I think he was I think he became well known, I think, in France, and also spent some time in the UK. But I think he was sort of a mysterious fellow who kind of didn't really like tell people what his backstory really was, which I think only helped him, made him more mysterious.
Yeah, for sure. Built a lot of stories around him too.
Yeah.
When we have creatures and or characters like this in our lore, I tend to think something had to trigger it. We discussed this a little bit already. But when it comes to a being that has all these various abilities, as you mentioned, we have crossovers from ghosts and witches and stuff like that. Are we maybe looking at an amalgam in the first place? A creature that kind of embodies all these things, and then we gave it a name and a behavior and all that fun stuff?
I mean, I think it's, the vampire, as I said earlier, we like boxes around things. We like to categorize things. When you look at folklore, you look at legends, it's not like they were like bound by some rule of like, well, the according to the encyclopedia, these are the definitions of what a vampire is or a witch is. I think, people were looking to they had certain beliefs, different belief systems that would influence kind of what they thought, and they were looking to explain natural phenomena around them, explain things going on. And I think there's, kind of an as human beings, we tend to have this sort of, underlying kind of drives and motivations, and sort of the collective unconscious, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think that, this sort of creates a soup there where you get repeating patterns of things. And, maybe there's a little bit from column A and less from column B over here, and vice versa over there.
Sure.
But, you see stuff kind of crop up over and over again. What did the vampire, was there like one original place where like the notion of someone might be undead, and then it just like spread it spread all over the place from there? It's possible, but I don't know. To me, I feel like it checks enough boxes just in terms of kind of interpretations and motivations and kind of unconscious things, that it feels, I believe that these things came up independently in various places. That doesn't seem unreasonable to me.
Well, that also lends to the idea that perhaps these things had a basis in reality, because they are literally a worldwide phenomena in not only now, but in the ancient past. I mean, from the earliest writings of most civilizations around the world, these creatures existed. And it's fascinating to note that they all had some of the basics things. One of them was draining life essence and or blood. And we can kind of take a sidestep there and talk about the energy vampire, which is a form of this. In fact, it was in The Things We Do in the Shadows.
I was going to say Colin Robinson.
Colin
he was like
Robinson.
He was the best one. He was like the best one. He was hilarious.
He was. He was such a passive-aggressive weenie.
So great.
It was great. It was great.
So funny.
And it worked. Here they fell for his trap every time. It's hilarious. But I mean, and there's even clubs today, like in New York, for sure. I know of one in New York. I know of one in LA. There used to be one in San Francisco, but that was their thing. We're energy vampires. Welcome to the club. And they'd ask permission. Can I sample you? Can I feed on you? And they would use those electrostatic graphs, those little photos you take.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I've seen those.
And you get the energy pattern around your hand.
And
there was a before and an after. And the person would apparently be diminished to a degree after a feeding. So it was very interesting. It was very interesting. But it still lends to the possibility that our ancestors saw something. And if these people in these clubs are actually doing that energy drain, perhaps that's what there was really experienced. That's what they really experienced. And they just related it to blood because they didn't know about, our electrochemical processes in the human body. So, I mean, this is pure speculation and theory at this point. But it makes me think, even now, even with everything we've just discussed, that there was a basis for this creature to exist.
I mean, who's to say? Who know? I mean, the thing that, when you look at folklore and you look at legends, people interpret things through their kind of their lens, right? Their spiritual worldview, right? So the same phenomena might be experienced by multiple people, but depending on their beliefs and what they kind of what they know about certain things, they may describe it differently or put different words around it. So who's to say like what someone originally saw, that could be some kernel to truth to it, that then they interpreted it and retold it certain ways, and then people did the same thing. I mean, like you think about like, there was a beam of light from the sky and there was a humanoid figure in it, and then it disappeared, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, how would you describe that? Well, in the ancient world, they might say, oh, that was one of the gods, right? Oh, that we god the temple of Apollo. That was Apollo, or someone who believes, has a strong belief in heaven. Oh, that was an angel. That was a light of heaven. Or someone who believes in UFOs, aliens, oh, that was an alien, right? That was an encounter,
Mhm.
right? You could you could describe the same, it's the same thing that I've
Yeah.
described, but interpreted different ways. So what is it really versus how it's interpreted? Is everyone kind of right in some regard? Like there's some sort of, it's just different ways of saying the same thing. Like, who knows?
That's
Big world
I
out there.
mean that's kind of what I was getting at, is that these different things with their interpretation does come into play. It's a long-term historical game of telephone, really, because we weren't writing things down out the gate. We had to develop writing in order to convey these ideas, and for posterity. But it also lends to the fact that I go back to this world, everyone, roughly around the same time period in our ancient past experienced these creatures to one degree or another. I mean, look at the Chinese vampire, the ones who hop.
Jiangxi, yeah,
and they
yeah.
hop everywhere because their legs are tied together when they're buried back in the old days. And there was a reason for it too. I guess, gosh, I can't remember what it was now.
Yeah, I've never been clear on the
escapes me.
I kind of always thought the hopping was maybe because they were like stiff from being dead or something, like
Well,
rigor
they
mortis
tied
or
their
something like
legs
that, did they?
in their burial traditions at one point or another, and I don't know if it was because they were suspected of being vampires in the first place or
I
not.
guess it wasn't slowing them down though, because then they could just hop. They were just hopping.
Well, they can
around.
hop everywhere, yeah, like human kangaroos everywhere. They probably kill it in a three-legged race, But it was, I mean, so there's different things, but also those Chinese vampires are bloodsuckers, which is interesting. I find that very, because that's an old society, man. I mean that's a very old society.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if there's. You gotta. I mean, you gotta wonder how did it all come about? I agree. It's certainly unclear, and it's interesting. It gets you thinking. What is the connection between it all?
I guess that's my ultimate question. What
Yeah,
is the connection? What
yeah,
told everyone around the world about this particular thing?
yeah,
You know?
yeah. But there's something you need to be scared of. There's something you need to be scared of.
Yeah, for
Right,
sure.
right. It's coming after you. Like maybe it's a
It's
dead person, maybe it's a monster, maybe it's what,
yeah,
but there's something that's your life is in date. It's gonna get taken. You know?
yes.
Yeah.
Or you could lose your soul to one of these creatures if you
Mm.
become one. That
Yeah.
was another thing that
Yeah.
was more or less universal. It didn't play everywhere that way, but basically that's it. And then you have the South Pacific thing, which goes completely off the map, and it's a shadow roaming on the ground. That's gonna
Yeah.
eviscerate you from the
Yeah.
feet.
I mean, there were some
The-
beliefs that vampires were invisible, that they couldn't be seen. Only certain people could see them. So
ah,
again, you get into this sort of like, with that aspect to it, it's like with the shadow, like this sort of unseen threat,
yeah,
right? Like there's something coming for you and you can't see it, but
yeah,
it's
yeah,
malicious,
yeah. It's coming to get you, like you said.
Gotta watch out.
It's coming to get you. So when we look at these beliefs and their potential causes, are we looking at, well, I mean, I was going to say a global hoax, but at the same time, we have to take into account our ancestors using their limited, whatever, science, sociology, whatever, and still come up with the same conclusion everyone else did around the globe, roughly. Does this mean that we perhaps were, I'm spitballing, I'm just throwing ideas to make conversation. Are we looking at a potential invasion from an outside force, interdimensionally, or from the stars or something like that? Are we looking at something that could be so foreign to us that we just don't understand it because it's in humanoid form? We expect it from animals like bats and ticks and mosquitoes and a few other animals that drink blood. But for a human to do it, it's super rare. I mean, there's the occasional medical condition. Bram Stoker was rumored to be anemic, and he drank cow's blood to alleviate it.
Yeah, I'm I mean, I guess what if it was some sort of like, I don't know, other kind of entity or whatever, why would it look like people who were dead? Are you saying it's like taking their bodies or just assuming their form?
Yeah, either.
Yeah.
Either. I mean, what was that show? God, a great show too. Featured this elder gentleman. Oh, he was fantastic too. The guy who played like the groundskeeper in the Harry Potter series. That older gentleman who had the
Robbie
cat.
Coltrane.
Yes, I
Guy
think
played
that's
Hagrid.
him.
Yeah.
He played Hagrid. No,
Oh.
no. He was the. I'm sorry, I said groundskeeper.
The guy from Game of Thrones.
Potentially. I watched Game of Thrones. I don't remember him being in it. If he was fantastic, I'm sure. He played the first Doctor when they did a movie about him, Doctor Who. Anyway, he was in a series. It was based on the East Coast, and he just Strigoi. And the Strigoi in the story ended up being these worms, these really hyper intelligent parasites that would burrow into you, take over, and then you would be a vampire, basically.
Was this there was a TV was this a TV show?
Yes.
Where like the vampires, they would like shoot something out of their mouth and like it would, and like that's how you got infected with the worms. Like it was
maybe. I know I don't remember that aspect of it.
This you probably, if it was the same show, you probably would, but there was, I guess, another show. It was that was produced by, I think it was Guillermo del Toro.
I think we're talking about the same show.
Strain.
Strain.
That was a
Strain.
That was a show. Yeah, and the vampires were like a parasitic organism.
Yeah.
But they were all controlled by like one worm that had like the mind. And then
they were big. They're like tapeworms. They were huge.
But the Strain was a great show. That's another one where you see like the vampire stuff taking a sci-fi turn, right?
Yes.
It's like, okay, there's a science explanation for what the vampire is, not magical, right? So that's like, in that one, like the crosses didn't hurt, or the holy water wouldn't hurt those vampires.
Right.
Silver hurt them, but it's because they had a reaction to the metal. It wasn't like magic.
Right.
So usually they try to keep a few of the tropes, but give like a scientific explanation. It's like, well, the UV radiation hurts the vampire, or the silver has, that kind of stuff.
Well, Blade used UV radiation in spades.
Zapping them all and stuff like that.
Right. That was fantastic. Well, welcome, Vala. Am I reading that right? Valak. Or Valake. Welcome to the show, Valake. Who's apparently from hell. Well, okay. Fantastic. In quotes. You must be in a hot location. That's all I'm going to say. Sherry shared an interesting tale. Maybe you know about this one. A lady was on Lorelai's show the other day, and spoke of when she was taken as a child to a place in New Orleans, she believes, where the others with her were used for blood bags, basically, for vampires to feed on. And they went very often, apparently. So, something else to add to the website.
Intense.
That's incredible. I'd like a little more information about that. If you're care to share it with me, Sherry, that'd be great. But I mean that also, there's another aspect of it. Yeah, we have the strain where we get a little more scientific. We have so I mean, is there anything that always throughout time put these creatures aback? Said, okay, I'm gonna stay away. Was it always silver? Was it always a cross? Was it always sunlight?
Yeah. Well, interestingly, it was basically never really sunlight. In folklore, at best, sunlight might make the vampire go away or like go back to being inanimate, but it never killed them like it was like in movies today,
Okay.
where you see like the vampire like shrivel up or whatever from
Ash
the
away.
sun. Yeah, no, didn't happen in folklore.
Interesting.
Yeah, and there are some accounts where people saw vampires walking around during the day. But at best, the accounts are like, oh, the vampire went back to being lifeless when the sun came out. But the implication is they would have just come back again at night. They would have revived. And honestly, it sort of makes sense that sunlight wouldn't have destroyed vampires because if you think of a town gripped by some panic, you go through the trouble of exhuming a corpse. You're not just going to like leave it in the sun for 10 minutes and then bury it. That's not very cathartic, right? Everyone's like, oh, this has got to be the problem. All right, well, just put it in the sun. Okay. Problem solved.
Problem solved.
Yeah. It wasn't because nothing climactic would happen like in a movie where it would like turn to dust
Burn
or
up
something.
and
Yeah.
right, catch fire and all that.
So different places had different beliefs about vampires. Staking a vampire was pretty well represented in folklore. A lot of people believed in that kind of thing. But interestingly, the rationale for staking a vampire was I think they probably viewed it a bit differently than we view it today. Like in movies today, like the vampire will like maybe lunge at someone and they'll stake the vampire in the chest and that kills them. Right. So there's something a bit more like, I don't know, magical or rule based to it today, where like a stake through the heart kills the vampire. In times gone by, when they described it, they would sometimes say like they drove a stake through the vampire into the ground underneath it. So the idea was they were pinning the vampire to the ground so it couldn't get back up again.
Right.
That was sort of an important point. So it was more of a physical thing of keeping the vampire in place. They did sometimes believe though that the wood that you used was important.
I heard something about that.
Yeah.
It had to be specific wood.
Specific wood. Hawthorn was usually one, or blackthorn. I think maybe sometimes oak. Usually the explanation for that is in those places, whatever wood was the wood they said was believed to either be the wood from the crown of thorns, the same type of same tree, same type of wood, or from the cross, the same type of wood as the cross.
Gotcha.
So that adds like a spiritual component.
I was going to say, how does that wood affect that wood?
I think it's one of those things where because that type of wood was used, then like that wood forever always is sort of significant or
magically binding.
Like that. Yeah, something along those lines.
That's interesting.
Favored, I guess.
Okay, I get you.
But so staking or doing something physical or practical to keep the vampire in place, destroying the body in some way, cutting off the head or something like that. A lot of times it was just like, so the vampire can't get back up again. And you do hear about accounts where they tried one thing, they tried another thing, and then eventually they would burn the body. That's usually like the final, like the last ditch effort for any of these tales. If any of the other things didn't work, or they did those other things and they still kind of weren't satisfied, they would do all the we're going to cut up the body and then we burned it. So they would burn the body, scatter the ashes, because now there's no body anymore. There's nothing to come get you, right? And when it comes to vampires, they believe that that body was the thing that was going to come get you. It was the problem. So either you keep it in the grave or you burn it. I presume they didn't go right to burning because that's like a lot of work. It would have been like kind of resource intensive.
A lot of resources go into that. Yeah.
Would have been resource intensive for like a rural village to do.
Yeah. I mean, and it would take the whole village to build that thing, probably.
Yeah, you have to build a big thing. Now you used up a lot of wood, which is probably valuable for winter.
Yeah,
so it probably wasn't necessarily something they wanted to do right out of the one I like. I sometimes talk about this one. This is like what I would do. Like there was one account where they would take a stake. It was a distaff, which is used for spinning yarn, but it looks like a stake.
Okay.
And they would put one or some of them. They would just drill them and nail them into the ground above where the vampire was buried. So if the vampire decided to leave the grave, it would stake itself. And
Gotcha.
so then you didn't
Auto-staking.
actually have to like dig the person up or do any more work than was required. So I was like,
like
that's like whoever came up with that one was probably like me. They're like, let's not go crazy here, folks.
Let's simplify it. Or like I said, the lady and the little girl was grave in Poland who had the scythe that's like built into the casket.
Just like put it there and you know, the problem will take care of itself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, to put that level of thought into taking your dead down permanently, though.
I mean, it shows you how worried they were about it.
Yeah, it does.
They thought a lot about it, you know?
Yeah. It was all-consuming, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It wasn't like, oh, we'll just say a prayer or a magic spell and they'll do it. It's like they were thinking very practically about it. You know?
Yeah, there didn't seem to be any other methodology other than a practical one.
Yeah, they were being very practical. They're like, well, if this person's going to get up, well, we need to stop that. Well, how do you stop someone from getting up? You know,
Scythe across the neck, stakes in the lid of the casket. That'll do it.
Yeah, probably the thing too about doing the scythe is that then they didn't actually have to damage the body if they didn't have to.
Yeah.
Which might be one thing, you know, consideration. It's like, if this is a problem, it'll take care of itself. But we didn't actually do anything, like, you know, in terms of desecration. Let's say,
hands are clean on that one.
Yeah. I can safely say we didn't do anything to damage the person.
Right.
Yeah.
Booby trapped the living bejesus out of it.
Yeah,
but
right.
hands are clean. So we have in our more modern versions, and even going back to Bram Stoker, vampire hunters. So we have Van Helsing and his troop and Bram Stoker's tale, and Van Helsing's had a life and a lineage all the way up to modern times. And but were there, and we talked about the kits that were in the various museums.
Yeah, that's good.
Were there vampire hunters back then? That's like, you know, their version of Ghostbusters is like, I got a vampire, come on down.
Yeah, there were. Yeah.
Okay.
There absolutely were. Oh yeah. Yeah. There were people they were experts in it. That was their job.
Interesting.
Or a job they had. I don't know if you could fill a whole schedule with vampire hunting. But yeah, there were people who kind of they were the experts in it. There were beliefs, and you mentioned Blade earlier, right?
Yeah.
And Blade is like a half vampire, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that actually was a thing. People believing in half vampires.
Okay.
And so
that's news to me.
Yeah. No,
I didn't know that. That's fantastic.
No, it was a total thing. And so a lot of the vampire there were the vampire hunters in certain areas. They would actually claim lineage from a vampire. Like so the whole notion of a half vampire going out and hunting vampires actually was established in folklore and events that happened. And so they were like sort of people or families who like they would claim descent from like a half vampire. So they might not be the half vampire. It might have been like a great grandfather or something. Gotcha. But it was believed that had passed down to them. And so people would go to them and be like, hey, can you go, we were being troubled by a vampire, can you help us? And they would go and take care of it. And I think in one account it said like the vampire hunter people kind of kept to themselves. But that was a thing, because in some places they believe like vampires couldn't be seen. Like there were some people who like, oh well, this person can see vampires, so they're the person that has to like take care of it. Or they have the ability to like stop the vampire, like they had some authority. I think it was people who were born on Sundays. I think maybe that was also like a thing. Yeah, there's like a term. There's a term for that. So that was that. There was one account where people were being troubled by a vampire, and they asked the local priest to help, and he wasn't helping. He put holy water and this and that, and it wouldn't work. Everyone was still seeing this vampire. And then a sorcerer from another town, they called this sorcerer to come in, and they called the sorcerer in, and the sorcerer took care of the vampire immediately. the person who recounts the story, it happened in Turkey, and she wrote it down. She was not from Turkey. I believe she was but living there. So she wrote down the whole tale, and in her opinion, the whole thing was a big scam. That the vampire and the vampire, quote unquote, was just a person who was just going around scaring people, as far as I think she thought, and the sorcerer were basically in cahoots. And so, so the vampire was going around, and then the sorcerer comes in and suddenly, all right, now I took care of it, and they they had to pay him. But yeah, no, there were vampires or people who claimed to have expert knowledge or ability to dispel a vampire, and half vampires were a thing, which I was
crazy.
Surprised too when I found it out, because I thought it just seems such like a modern notion.
It does. It seems really modern.
Oh, they've got the strength of, like, oh, they're a half vampire, so they've got the strength of a vampire, they don't have the weakness of a vampire. I was like, oh, this is someone came up with this because the vampire stuff was getting stale, and we needed to. But no, it was like it was a thing. I don't necessarily think they had all these like superpowers like you'd have like with Blade or whatever, but they were believed to have some skill or ability with it. Yeah.
That's just amazing to me.
Yeah.
Oh man,
I got a kick out of that one. There were other, and the very first time I heard about a half vampire from some other source, it just said, oh well, children born of a vampire and a human, they'd be born without bones, and that was it. So I was like, oh, that's a letdown. But then I found all these other tales about the actual supposed vampire hunters.
Bones.
So I was like, oh, well, that's better. That's better than just like a blob person.
He comes slumping into the room. I'll help you.
Yeah, no bones. Just
it's like okay.
Yeah, they kind of roll in.
Oh man. Oh geez. Born without bones. That's another first for me.
It is. I think it comes from some people thought vampires had no bones, because they would swell up, and so they thought they were just like full of like fluid. They'd swell up like a drum. That's often used in some accounts. So I think they thought that they just were all liquid on the inside, like full of I don't know, blood or whatever. But
does this go back to the body bloating?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So we also have people, real humans, who actually have vampiric qualities. We have pyphoria, for example, the allergy to the sunlight. We have people who are anemic, who in the old days would actually drink blood in order to calm their anemia. We have still other people who just had that natural denture, that they had really pointy canine teeth. So was this possibly all misidentification and all the rest of it, because we just had a few people in our existence that were different?
Well, the porphyria argument gained a lot of traction. I don't know, so in the past, like, oh, porphyria, that's the explanation for vampires. Unfortunately, a lot of the porphyria stuff actually doesn't really align with the folklore stuff.
Okay.
Or some of these other things. Like I think like one of them was like the sunlight thing, right? Which the sunlight, I think we talked about it previously, but it didn't like do anything to vampires, like damage them or anything like that.
Right.
Folklore. They were okay. You mentioned the teeth thing, the fangs thing, and I always feel like I'm giving people bad news when I talk about this. I feel like I'm ruining Christmas or something. But
ruin that Christmas.
Yeah,
EP.
I know.
Go for
it. In folklore, in legend, vampires did not have fangs. Which I think probably comes to surprise some people, because there's like, if you think of like the quintessential like vampire trait thing in like modern shows, like it's the fangs, right? Like
it's fangs,
right?
Even my snaggletooth.
Even the snaggletooth. They didn't like, you could watch a show now with nothing. If someone turned to the camera, smiled, and they had fangs, you'd be like, oh, it's a vampire.
Yeah.
Like, But they didn't. It wasn't talked, like if you read the accounts, like no one talked about them having fangs.
Okay.
It wasn't ever really brought up. At best, there's a couple accounts where it said the vampire had long teeth, which again, people will read that and go, "Oh, those are the fangs." It's like, it doesn't say fangs; it says teeth. You know, if someone had, that would imply all the teeth, which perhaps you could, attribute to like, oh, well, maybe gums were receding through decomposition or something like that. But it wasn't the two fangs and like the whole two marks on the neck.
Yeah.
That wasn't in folklore at all.
Okay.
You'll read accounts where there might be a single mark on the neck. But not the two puncture wounds like we see in TV shows,
Sure,
and stuff like that. But yeah, the vampire teeth, usually, that by and large, they're not mentioned. It's not a thing. And given the things that they did look for and identify in some of these accounts, they would have been mentioned if they were,
yeah.
So yeah, there was really nothing about vampires having the two elongated canines in folklore, which is sort of surprising and a bummer. But it came as a product of Victorian Gothic fiction. There was, in the early 1800s, there was a penny dreadful called Varney the Vampire. And it ran for a long time. It got compiled as like an 800-page book or something like that.
Oh my god!
I think they got paid by the word or something back then.
Yeah,
so they were just
they did.
And that talks about the vampires' tusk-like teeth, and it specifically mentions the two marks on the neck. And so that's where it came, and that kind of just stuck around, and kept going. But that was really the first time. But yeah, if you read the folklore, their teeth are kind of unremarkable. Sometimes it says they have like really strong teeth, so they can chew through the grave or something like that.
Interesting.
But yeah, the two like punctures and sucking, and sometimes it talks about marks in other spots, marks on the chest from the vampire from vampire's attack. And sometimes there's no mark at all or indication of how the vampire sucked blood. They simply, people are sick, we dig up the corpse, we see the blood around the mouth.
Vampire.
Ipso facto. There it is.
Well, that was easy.
Yeah. Must be it. But in terms of how, in some ways it didn't matter, because they thought clearly it is happening as far as they're concerned. We don't need to say how precisely he's doing it. It could just be magic in some form. You know what I mean? Like it's just, it's happening, through space. That like a mystical explanation.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I am bummed by the lack of fangs,
I know.
but that's okay.
Yeah, I know. It's a surprising one, but yeah, it doesn't ever come up. So.
There's a painting, and I don't know who did it. Semi-famous painting, depicting a Greek Lamia who was a cursed woman who ate children, basically. Yep. And there they gave her what is essentially a lion's mouth, the twin fangs coming down, and twin canines rather coming down, and mid bite of some child corpse, and kind of gross actually. But it's fascinating that they went with that interpretation, and there are the floor around her is littered with bones and body parts and stuff like that, and it's more like a lion,
yes,
feasting versus someone gently like sipping,
someone sneaking in,
right,
and discreetly sucking blood and then
there was no discretion at all in this image. It was an animal feasting on a kill, basically. And it was just as bloody as you might imagine. And it was just an interesting interpretation. It's like, wow. So, yeah, it actually speaks to what you just said too. There was, it's either that level of animal intent, and then that gives way to the Victorian gentle person who's kind of lightly, tap at your neck or whatever. Now, okay, let's talk about people who, well, let's say, gosh, I don't even know if this is a real person. Madame Bovary is who I'm thinking of.
Mm-hmm.
Real person.
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure either. Internet check.
Internet, please tell me.
Please, yeah, right. I think I will do that while we're discussing this. But she was, I think she's a real person. Yeah, I'm a little embarrassed I don't know this. Madame Bovary, real or unreal? She was this duchess or princess or something along those lines who, oh, it's a novel. It's a character.
Mm.
Okay. Yeah, fictional character. Well, I'll shut up then. But she was still a vampire, but I don't think she had the typical vampire traits. She was apparently just figured out that if she bathed in blood, she'd stay young.
Oh! I know who you're talking about. Elizabeth Bathory.
Bathory.
As opposed to Bovary. Bathory. She was a real person. Yeah.
Like I said, she was a real person.
She was a real person. She was a real person. Yes. She was a countess from Romania. It might have been Transylvania at the time.
Oh my God, really?
It might have been.
That's amazing.
I think it might have been. It's Romania. Yeah. So she came to prominence. She came back into the public consciousness, let's say. I don't know, some decades ago, there was like a book written about her, like, was Dracula a woman? That kind of thing. So she was accused of she was a countess, she was a noblewoman, she had a lot of female servants. So she was accused of abusing her servants, killing them, and bathing in their blood for her beauty, her youth.
Right.
And she was put on trial for it, and a bunch of people testified against her. I think nowadays maybe some people wonder if it was kind of a sham or something like that, or not. I don't know. I wasn't there. I wasn't there. But she was ultimately she was found guilty. And I think she was essentially walled up in one of her rooms in the castle. I think with, like, she could still have, she was given like food and stuff like that.
Through a hole in the wall kind of a
deal?
Yeah.
I think that kind of thing. But basically in prison for the rest of her life. And I don't think I'm not sure she lived much long afterwards. But yeah, that was the thing. Now, so she's often brought up with vampire stories, vampire accounts, like, oh, she was a vampire. Thing is, she was like, no one thought she was a vampire, actually. Yeah. She was they thought she was like a serial killer and disturbed. But they didn't think she was like undead. They didn't think she was like, supernatural or anything.
Which is interesting. You think with the type of stuff she was doing.
Yeah, you think maybe some people might, I could see the accusation being like a witch or something like that being thrown at her. But anyway, she was put on trial and for crimes. She was a living person committing crimes.
Apparently, I'm just reading the wiki right now. She killed like hundreds of young ladies.
Supposedly, I guess according to the story, she got a little ambitious and it stopped being like peasants and started being like the daughters of like other noble families. And
right. She got a little bit.
Yeah,
I bet you have a lot of blood.
Yeah. So suddenly that raised her profile a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She got careless.
She did. I think some other people who worked for her were also convicted of like aiding and abetting or something like that. But this was what, like 1600s, I want to say.
Yeah, according to this, it was 16th century into the 17th, so 1790 to 1610. Excuse me, 1590 to 1610. I cannot speak today.
1610. Okay, yeah. So there you go. But yeah, wild story.
That surprises me. That story does surprise me that they didn't go into. They didn't say, "Oh, she must be a vampire or a witch or something," because they went with crime. versus
Yeah.
supernatural.
Yeah,
And they're
yeah.
not wrong. They're not
No,
wrong
no,
per se.
like seemed they were surprisingly level-headed about it.
Yeah. So is that because it took place in the middle of a larger town or something like that?
I don't. I mean, she was well, so she was a noble person, and
Yeah.
so you figure other noble people would have been involved in in her prosecution.
Yeah.
They probably would not have necessarily subscribed to some of those beliefs. Again, depending on the time and place, but that might not have they might not have grown up with that kind of notion.
That's it. Well, it's
Uh,
interesting. Hungary. I mean,
Yeah, but you also, I mean, you'll see differences between like a rural area versus an urban area in terms of what they're connected to and kind of,
Fair
how
point.
they interpret things.
okay.
At the same time, though, I do agree. It seems like it would have been a ripe time to throw at least that accusation that some accusations
Yeah.
for something supernatural. And the thing is too, we don't know. Maybe people did, but no one wrote it down. You know what I
that
mean?
could be the case.
Like maybe everyone's like, yeah, she's probably a witch. But like, in terms of the court proceedings, they were like, well,
Yeah.
no, we're not going to write that. See, I mean, people have been tried and convicted for supernatural crimes, in those kinds
later,
of times.
about 100 years later, they'd be doing it.
Yeah, and it's disturbing stuff.
Yeah.
So it didn't stop people, even people who were supposedly well educated, from accusing people of supernatural things that certainly
Yeah.
didn't stand up to any scrutiny, but they still did it.
Yep.
They still made that accusation and stuck to it. So yeah, I mean, when you start digging into like the overlap between vampires and witch trials, and you start looking at the witch trials stuff, or you look at like the Salem witch trials, and you read some of what was, it's like, oh my god, like really,
They followed the testimony of little girls. Oh my god!
I mean, it was just wild stuff. The thing about the Salem witch trials is it puts it in perspective. Like what they allowed spectral evidence into the trials.
Yes.
which is basically just someone saying something supernatural happened. Right. It's just someone's word for it, but that's spectral evidence. And so all these people, they get accused and found guilty and stuff like that. But then when the governor's wife is accused, then spectral evidence, that does no, you can't.
That doesn't count.
No, that doesn't hold up. It's like it's you read some of it, you're like, are you kidding me?
Yeah, I know.
Law?
I mean, even back then, that's a leap of logic. From my perspective.
Yeah, I mean, she's like you can just say anything, and people are just gonna buy it. It was, but you talk about hysteria gripping a community, right?
Yeah, man. I mean, to rely on a bunch of little kids to provide testimony.
Oh, yeah, I mean,
who have imaginations like little kids. I mean,
you had these young girls and then all these adults just get on the bandwagon,
and they go for it.
And then some adults, I think, were being smart about it and being like, well, I've always wanted that parcel of land over there.
Yeah, I'm thinking you're right there. Yeah. I'm thinking you're right there.
I've never really liked that person.
Yeah, so
I bet.
She's a witch.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Who said that? Yeah, it's wild. But I've got a few articles up on my website about visiting Salem and some of the different things they have there. It's an interesting trip to go to Salem. There's a lot of different attractions there. Some are kind of more fun oriented, and then there's there's a witch trial memorial there with the names of all the people and all that, and by the graveyard, more somber. They're not buried there, not buried at the graveyard, the witch trial victims.
They're not?
No, they weren't allowed to be.
What happened to their bodies?
They were witches.
Were they burned or?
No, they were the body. They were hanged, and then usually I think they were just.
I'm sorry, were their corpses burned?
Yeah. No, the corpses were. No, I don't believe so. I think sometimes they were like left somewhere in like a ravine or something, and like sometimes families would come and get them and bury them on like their own property or something like that.
Gotcha.
But I don't. I as far as I recall, I don't believe people convicted or executed of witchcraft were allowed to be buried like in
the common graveyard.
in the graveyard. Yeah.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I
just
get that, but Okay. I'm
I mean,
applying
yeah,
modern stuff to past
yeah,
mentality, and it doesn't
yeah.
apply.
I mean, the fact that they got there at all with the whole process is, is shocking.
I
But
think you're spot on, AP. I think it's like, okay, whether they colluded with the kids or not, you get an extra piece of sugar
yeah, I mean,
if,
and I mean, I
or,
know that, I wrote a bit about this in one of my articles, but the people at the time, there was a lot of tension in the town. People were worried about, like conflicts that were going on, and there was like, I think there was like an influx of people there, so like resources were tight, and
mm,
so there were a lot of pressures going on. So I think that kind of added to this atmosphere that made it kind of ripe for that kind of thing.
gotcha.
But they found the actual execution site some years back,
Hmm,
had been lost. They didn't know exactly where the execution site was.
really?
Yeah, but thanks to some historians and archaeologists, they found the spot, and some years ago they erected kind of a monument at the spot where the actual executions were, which is kind of a little bit further away from the downtown, so people don't go to that as much. But I did write an article about it. I have some pictures there. So you can see, but it's on Gallows Hill. People always figured it was like somewhere on Gallows Hill, but they had lost the spot. It wasn't remembered where exactly.
But for the name.
Yeah, yeah. But
Right.
people always thought it was on the people just sort of assumed, it was on the top. They kind of, oh, Gallows Hill, it's on the top of Gallows Hill. It wasn't on the top
Okay.
of Gallows Hill, because that would have been like a lot of work to like get up to the top.
Resources. Got to remember the resources.
Yeah. I mean, it was Salem Witch House.
That tree's tall enough. That one.
Yeah.
Wow.
But anyway, so
Not the laugh of the hanging people, but
dark humor,
a little gallows humor.
Yeah,
Oh no!
yeah.
Ba-dum-bum.
Oh boy.
You can leave my show. I'm so sorry. Please
But
come
it was
back
an
though.
interesting spot. I like visiting. Yeah, I like visiting Salem. It's interesting place, and a lot of fun activities there and stuff like that to do too. And I like the history. There's a lot of history beside the witch trials in Salem as well. But
Yeah, there was a number of firsts were there, if I'm not mistaken.
yeah, I think. Well, I know they were. Salem was a very prosperous port town. Ships would go all over the world, come back to Salem, and stuff like that. And I think, there was a toy manufacturer there as well. I forget which one. But there was an exhibit about it. And I think it was the. I don't know. I think they're the ones that manufacture the Ouija board or something like that. So
Right.
you get into that. But
Good
yeah.
times.
But so anyway, but you see there's overlaps between witches and vampires, where you see like you have a community, they're worried about something, they're scared about something,
Right.
they're looking to blame people for some sort of malady or perceived problem. And with vampires, the focus goes on the dead. With the witches, the focus goes on the living.
That's very interesting.
And with the vampires, you can argue, well, the suspect, the person accused, is already dead. So it's an upsetting thing that happens to the people surrounded, but the actual accused person is already dead. So you really kind of can't hurt them, right? But with the witch trials, witch accusations, those are living people,
Yeah.
right? And so that's the scary bit. It's just, so there's a lot of overlap between the two. It's just, where does the suspicion fall?
That's a very good point. Hey, Sherry, can I join you in Newfoundland? That sounds fun. Just a visit. But now, actually, that kind of brings up another question regarding, and we're straying off vampires slightly. There was a similar witch trial thing in Canada, wasn't there?
Oh, I'm not aware, actually.
Okay, I thought there was, and I thought maybe it was Newfoundland when they did where they pulled that off. But I don't know. Perhaps Sherry can enlighten me. Let's go back to vampires. We have 10 minutes left. Okay, let's talk about your book. So, the name of the book is Vampires of Lore. And in the book, you explore not only everything we've talked about today, but what other aspects do you explore in the book?
Well, basically, the book, I really kind of go trait by trait. Each chapter is sort of devoted to a trait that we associate to modern vampires. And I try to figure out, is this an actual authentic piece of folklore, or is this something that was introduced in modern times, either through literature or movies or what have you? So
Gotcha.
each one is kind of addresses that. So I talk about things, I talk about the fangs, I talk about the turning into animals. I talk about kind of the superpowers that we sort of associate with vampires, like flying or strength and stuff like that. The appearance of vampires, like, we tend to think of them as sort of cadaverous or whatever, while we talked about today that they were thought to be like healthy looking and fresh looking,
Right.
not corpse looking. How you create a vampire, like what causes a vampire to come into existence. I talk a bit about that, because we often just think, oh, someone bitten by a vampire becomes a vampire, but that's not necessarily what people believed, back in times gone by. So I talk about kind of all of those different sorts of traits. I think one of my last chapters, my last chapter is about witches and werewolves and some of the overlaps.
Good.
Yeah, talk about crosses and holy water and stuff like that. So all of the things you tend to associate with a vampire. I'm like, what's the story here?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of citations. I anytime I say something about vampires, I put a citation. You can see where I got it, where it came from.
Excellent.
You can
Excellent
learn,
work. That's fantastic.
learn what I did, and read that source, see what it says.
Yeah. Well, I think that's wonderful. I think most authors who do this type of work should do that, if they don't anyway. Yeah, I think that's very important, because you don't want to, it's like, here's my theory. It's not like you have I don't know if you do have a doctorate of any sort, but I mean, even if you did, you still have to cite your sources, I would say.
Oh, you do. It's essential. It's essential to when you're kind of, you're trying to do this analysis, and I was trying to sort of like peel away the modern vampire to get at the original vampires, like the folklore vampire.
Sure.
And I hit so many stumbling blocks with people saying things that then I kind of found out weren't, were sort of fudged or not quite, quite authentic. Then it's like, well, I need to make sure I'm doing my homework here.
Gotcha.
And it's like, if I said something like, oh, well, here's where it's from, you can read it for yourself. You don't need to take my word for any of it.
Exactly. It's fantastic. Now, you wrote this how many years ago?
I think it came out in 2019.
Oh, rather recent then. Okay. That's fantastic. So, any follow-up compendiums in the future, or follow-up books in general?
Yeah, I've slowly been chipping away at some other kind of another piece of work, which I don't know if vampire themed. Not sure. Hopefully I get it done. I like doing it. But I'm still sort of exploring different aspects of folklore, and kind of honing in on some areas that maybe I talk about briefly in my book, but this kind of lets me like dive deeper.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, there's vampires in all sorts of places we don't tend to think of or talk about. I mean, in the Nordic countries, in the Icelandic sagas, they talk about the undead, draugurs, as they call them, and we don't ever sort of hear about that really. So like I'm looking at that stuff, and
that's really neat. That's really fantastic. And we can visit you and your various adventures exploring these things at locationsoflore.com, which is scrolling across the bottom of your screens, those of you who are watching. And we can also... Oh, there's another place, is there not, where you can visit you and get more information?
I would say Locations of Lore is the place to go. I've got links to all my social media there.
Okay.
So you can you can follow me on those things. But that's that. Locationsoflore.com. That's probably the best place to go to read up on what I'm up to, what I'm diving into. And there's not just vampire stuff on there. There's other places, other kind of folklore and
monsters and stuff.
Different monsters, different monsters. I wrote up a big thing about elves in Iceland.
Fun.
Yeah, that was really cool. I went to the elf capital in
Did you
Iceland.
really?
I did. I was on
Where's the
lookout.
elf capital?
Yeah, it's in a town called hopefully I say it correctly, Hafnarfjordur.
Okay, congratulations. That was well done. The fourth, I can't even say it. Repeat it.
Yeah, no, yeah. So in
Nice.
yeah, town Hafnarfjordur is this very very nice town where there's this park, and they have a strong tradition of elves being there, or huldefolk, which is what they call them. So I kind of actually did an analysis like, well, what do they believe about elves, and what's in Norse mythology about elves, and kind of where did that, because then there was a shift when the Nordic countries changed to Christianity.
Yeah.
And how they viewed elves and what they were, you know. So, and just beliefs about some people do believe in elves to this day in Iceland.
Really?
Yeah, oh yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. There's stories about roads being built and being like built around boulders and stuff because they believe they're home to elves.
That's amazing. Now, is it similar to what they do in like the Celtic countries, where they isolate and declare these like trees, various trees and little patches of land and circles where mushrooms grow in circles?
Oh yeah, like elf rings and stuff like that.
Elf rings and fairy rings and all that stuff. Do they still have? Do they have that kind of like, stay off this? This is elf territory.
I think for the people that do believe in elves, there's kind of the thing of like, don't mess with them, be respectful of them.
Right.
You know, if you're doing construction or whatever, make sure the elves are okay with it, or, you know, can we relocate the boulder? So there's definitely, because, you know, they can't, and I think there's been some overlap between some of the Celtic traditions and some of like the Icelandic traditions around elves.
Okay.
But yeah, it's fun stuff. But you can read about it on the site.
Fantastic. So go to a site, check him out, and definitely get his book. I know I'm probably going to get myself a copy, and for sure, so one more sale for you. Where can we get your book?
You can get it on certainly Amazon and other online booksellers.
Okay.
If you go to your local bookshop and ask, they could probably order it for you. It's published by Schiffer Publishing.
Fantastic. Okay. So hopefully you all have that information. I think it's in the description on the YouTube. Don't quote me on that, but I think it is. I'm pretty sure it is. Michelle's very good about that type of thing. And AP, I want to thank you for being on the show. It's been a pleasure having you.
Oh, thank you so much. I really enjoyed being here.
Yeah, great information. And next week, I believe, unless things change, we're going to be talking about the Jinn. DJINN, Jinn, and the various ancient and modern, not only connotations of this creature, but of the interactions with these creatures. So, stay tuned for that. My name's Tim Sudano. This has been Paranormal Insight, and once again, big thank you to AP Sylvia. And thank you to all of you who watched with us and joined us in the chat. We'll see you next time on Paranormal Insight. If you have a paranormal experience that you would like to discuss on the show, please email us at paranormal.insight.podcast@gmail.com. That's paranormal.insight.podcast@gmail.com.